Thank you. It's delightful to see all of you here tonight. Thank you for coming. We're so pleased to have Gloria Steinem here tonight. Let me talk to you about her just a bit. Gloria Steinem is a writer, lecturer, political activist, and feminist organizer. She's a trailblazer for women's rights and a leader of the second wave of feminist movement. Ms. Steinem co-founded New York Magazine and Ms. Magazine, and remained an editor for the latter for 15 years. She's a best-selling author of many books, with her most recent book titled My Life on the Road. She's a founding member of the National Women's Political Caucus, Women's Media Center, Voters for Choice, URGE, and Donor Direct Action. She recently co-produced 8 documentaries on violence against women from Zambia to Canada for Vice. Tonight, she'll be sitting with our moderator for the evening. Our moderator is Dr. Mara Perez Sheldon. She's an assistant professor in women's gender and sexuality studies and classic world religions. So I don't want to waste another minute. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Myrna Sheldon and most particularly Gloria Steinem. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I just want to say on behalf of Ohio University, really what an honor and a pleasure it is for us to have you here tonight to talk with us and think with us. And I know for so many of us, you've been an inspiration, but also because you keep encouraging us to think about how to keep making change, to build on the successes of the past and learn from the lessons of the past. So I wanted to start us off by thinking a little bit about history, but also looking to the future. So I wondered if you could tell us about some of the most important political changes you've seen for women's liberation and for social justice, either that you've seen or been a part of, and how you think that we can keep working and building on those changes.
Just a little thing like that.
Yeah, we're going to start off easy. Yeah. You know, we only have so much time. We got to get to the heart of it.
Well, I was born into a more rigid version of the hierarchy that we have. So for me, the great aha was that I was not crazy, the system was crazy, right? And I think a lot of us came to that in different ways, you know, that whether we were experiencing being put into a particular place because of our class or our race or our accent or our gender or whatever it was, if you grow up thinking that that's inevitable, then you know it takes a while to get out of it. And I think that's true also of family hierarchical structure, because we're never really going to have democracy till we have democratic families. And I was lucky because I had a reasonably democratic family, but I was thrust into a society that was not. So that realization, consciousness precedes. I mean, the idea that it could be different precedes making it different. But it wasn't until I was about 40 in my life that there was clearly a movement that included me fully. I mean, I'd been part of lots of movements, but I was sort of like the auxiliary in a lot of cases. And when the women's movement came along, it really made a difference because I realized that that I was not alone. Suddenly there was a community of women talking to each other and expressing things they thought only they had felt, and discovering all these other people who felt the same thing. So it's now at least we have words like sexual harassment, words like domestic violence, I don't know, all of these words, intersectional, all these words we didn't have before, and that's a big help. We understand it could be different. We've succeeded in changing the majority consciousness in this country. This is huge. Look at the public opinion polls. The majority of this country supports every single, including same-sex marriage, which didn't seem possible, I don't know, 20 years ago. So, and that is huge, 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 but it also means we have a backlash, because now the people who were in the majority have, they're a bit at sea because the old hierarchy is disappearing that they were depending on. And I think there's a certain amount of guilt talking, they fear that we're going to do to them what they did to us. But actually we're not. That isn't the way it works. I mean, once you've experienced discrimination, you're less likely actually to, right. But this backlash is dangerous because it has a lot of power and money and anger. So even though we are in the majority, we don't know for sure what's going to happen. And we sometimes get discouraged because the majority is represented up there. I mean, the minority, the third of the country, is represented up there. But we are the majority. We're going to do it anyway, right?
So as we're looking into the future, I wanted to ask you about a project that I know that you're working on right now. I had the chance to sit in on one of our WGSS courses that you spoke with today, and you mentioned a project that you're working on sort of bringing to light the history of the role that women of color always played in the feminist movement, and how this has sort of been hidden or forgotten. And I wonder if you could tell our audience here a little bit about that project, why you think it's important, and what knowing that history might help us think about how to be inclusive as we think about women's liberation in the present.
Well, I'm not quite sure how this happened. I mean, partly it was the media, partly it was just the definitions that were in our heads. But we got to thinking that the civil rights movement was, everybody in the civil rights movement was black and everybody in the women's movement was white, and never the twain should, even though the women's movement was very much inspired by the civil rights movement. So it got to be out there, even though it's kind of the reverse, because it's not so much that the women's movement included black women as that black women have always been leading the women's movement disproportionately to white women. And that was demonstrated to me in the very first issue of Ms. Magazine, when we published a Lewis Harris massive public opinion poll in which women were asked about the women's movement, the feminist movement, and feminist issues. And 60-some% of black women supported the women's movement and feminist issues, and only 30-some% of white women. And it's ever been thus. Anyway, so the book that I'm doing with Beverly Guy-Sheftell, who's a great, was head of the Women's Studies Association for many years, Paula Giddings, who's a very important author and scholar, who I think you know. The three of us got mad at about the same time. I said, wait a minute. So we're doing a book that we hope will be informative and entertaining, that because of the film, The Hidden Figures, we think of as the hidden figures of the women's movement. But it's really, I would say, redefining the women's movement, because the women like Fannie Lou Hamer, and I mean, who were doing feminist things, but you don't know it. And then there were women you don't know who were leading all these issues too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, for me, and I'm sure for many others, to realize that these movements have a history of being more inclusive, and capturing many voices as a sort of inspiration for how we think
But
about how we do the work.
No, I know what you mean, but the word inclusive sounds like white women had the power to include.
Yeah.
Black women were the leaders. I mean, I learned feminism from, Flo Kennedy and Fannie Lou Hamer and the National Welfare Rights Organization and, all kinds of, right.
Yeah, we need better words. So during the past month, we, in anticipation of your visit, we sort of opened up on social media people to ask questions with the hashtag #AskGloriaOhio. So I have some of them for you. So we'll entertain some social media questions before we go to the audience. So this one comes from Kimberly Zindak from Cincinnati, Ohio. And she wants to know if you could give any advice to your 30-year-old self, what would it be?
That's really interesting. I think I would just say, it's going to be okay. Because then I was still thinking that you had to follow a particular pattern, and even though I wasn't married and I didn't have children, I kept saying, no, I'm definitely going to do that, just not right now, because I thought everybody had to. The women's movement didn't come into my life until my late 30s, and then I suddenly discovered, wait a minute, I'm happy, and right. It's going to be okay, and you can follow your interest and follow what you love, and it'll be okay, right? If that makes sense. Right?
Well, the next question might be a little bit more on the worried side. So Valerie Paskiewicz Griffith from Columbus, Ohio, wants to know what worries you most about the future for women in the United States. So things that you're concerned about.
Well, I mean, obviously there are a lot of things. One is that I worry that what happens to women is still in a silo over here, as if it were separate from everything else, as opposed to pretty much the basis of everything else, because hierarchies pretty much start with controlling reproduction, which means controlling women's bodies in order to decide how many children and who they belong to and what race and caste and so on. Also, that's one way that it underpins everything. Another way is that violence against females in the home is the most reliable predictor by far of all other forms of violence. If you look at all the so-called senseless crimes, men who go into public places and shoot people they don't know, first of all, they're 100% men, white, middle class, not poor. They're exactly the people who are most likely to, through no fault of theirs, have been brought up to believe that men have a right to dominate. And then when it turns out not to be true, they go a little crazy. And it's not in their self-interest. I mean, they often even kill themselves after they commit these crimes. But the biggest predictor of that is that they have been violent to the women in their lives before that. But this connection is not made enough. I mean, for instance, Zimmerman, who killed Trayvon Martin, had been violent to women in his life. It wasn't even admissible at his trial. He was wrongly let off from, and has continued to be violent against women. So if we had made that connection, Trayvon Martin might be alive. It's also true of cops, incidentally. Cops who are racist and violent against, wrongly, unjustly violent against black men, especially, and women too, black women too, have disproportionately been violent towards the women in their life. So, what worries me is that it's the lack of connection. Because as long as women are viewed as a thing over here and all the other serious issues are over there, we won't, for instance, be assessing our foreign policy according to the position of women in the group or culture we're looking at. The surest way to predict a terrorist group is that they are gender polarized in the extreme. And I'm not sure that that's, I mean, not now, but even during the Obama administration, I don't know that that was really as much a part of our assessment of everything as it should have been.
Yeah, well, and this next question also is interested in your thoughts on particularly the recent conversation about sexual harassment and sexual assault towards women. So I think wanting to know more about your thoughts about the role that violence and sexual violence against women plays. So Ellie Clark from Athens, Ohio asks us, how can we give voices to girls and women who are not in positions of power to confront their abusers? She says, you and Jane Fonda both recently talked about how the hashtag #MeToo only providing a platform for calling out famous men.
Well, we all, wherever we are, you know, in groups, and especially on a campus, you have a great opportunity to just sit in a circle and say, what has your experience been? And what has your experience been? And also, since it is about power, not sex, it's more likely to happen to people who have less power. So the restaurant business, for instance, employs millions of people, and because it's dependent on tips, because they're wrongly exempt from minimum wage because they're tipped, so they're terribly dependent on tips, and it's disproportionately female, they are very subject to this. And I think that what this is leading to, too, is the prevalence of child sexual abuse. It hasn't quite got there, though we kind of know it. I mean, we've been there to some extent. But as long as dominance and power are sexualized, children will be sexualized. Because if you can't get the proper amount of dominance from an adult, you will be magnetized by a child. And it also explains at the other end the conduct of men like Harvey Weinstein, who produced great movies with great women. Meryl Streep, you know. The movie Frida, about Frida Kahlo, with Julie Taymor. He distributed the movie about sexual abuse on campus, The Hunting Ground. You know, he was obviously abusing people with less power. So, and we have to admit that women sometimes do it too. It is not only men. And there have been some exposés lately about women guards in prisons where there are a lot of young men and abusing the young men. And the very first case that was won under sexual harassment law was a woman executive in California who was requiring the sexual services of a much younger man who worked for her. So, you know, we're not exempting women here. It's just that women aren't rewarded for being aggressive. So it's statistically way more likely to be men. But once we see that it's about power, not sex, and I find that what helps a lot of men to understand this is to look at prisons where, in the absence of men, in the absence of women, men who are not otherwise gay and may even be homophobic, in the absence of women, sexually abuse younger, weaker men. So what could be clearer than that? That it's about the false sexualization of power. But I hope we don't lose in all of this the fact that human sexuality is not about power. It is about mutuality. It is about mutual. It is about mutual pleasure and bonding, and human beings, I think, are the only animals who are equally sexual whether we can procreate or not. So it's clearly not just about having progeny, it's about bonding and pleasure, and I hope we don't use, in the importance of no, we shouldn't lose the power of yes, right?
I think that's a good inspiration for all of us. Several of the people who wrote in had questions of sort of thinking about how expansively we can think about what we might call women's liberation or feminism. And so this writer is pointing to how gender fluidity, for instance, might help us or sort of inspire us to maybe
I think it's so
reconceptualize.
helpful. I think, that anytime we can challenge the binary, I really think that the world is divided into two kinds of people, those who divide everybody into two kinds of people, and those who don't. Okay, all right.
Yeah, so the way that they phrase their question, this is from Keely Riesbeck, also from Athens, Ohio. So they say, we're coming into an age where one's gender identity is less of an issue than ever before. Where does this really fit inside modern feminism?
We've been trying to get out from under because, in all those psychology courses where they say what's masculine, and you take all human qualities, this big circle of human qualities, and about a third are called feminine, and 2/3 are called masculine. So we're more limited, but men are limited too. All those empathy and attention to detail, and I don't know what, patience. It's really just everything that's necessary to raise children. That's and men who are raised with that have it too. There are men who are great parents, right? Okay. And if we raised our boys to be parents, we would, and gave them dolls and let them be babysitters. And, in New York once we had a group called Oh Boy Babies, 6th grade boys who went to a child care center once a week to take care of babies. And at first they said, if babies, they pee and you have to change them. But of course, then they got interested because babies are really interesting. And it made, and they got to be grown-ups. So the program got its name because every Thursday or whatever, they said, oh boy, babies. And I think those boys were way more likely to grow up to be whole people.
And I think several of the people who wrote in, I think, are looking for places to find joy or sort of hope, maybe particularly given our political climate. So Dr. Katie Kropf from Athens, Ohio asks, what do you do to cultivate positive energy and where do you find hope these days?
Here, but I think we find it with each other. Human beings are communal animals. We are not meant to be alone too much. And we maybe spend too much time alone with our computers, So I would say I find hope wherever there are a few people in a circle talking to each other, saying, here's what happened to me, what can I do about it, so right. And dancing and poetry and sex and I don't know, it's where you find hope. And why would you not? Why would you let anybody take your hope away? Because then you're cooked for openers. Hope is a form of planning. If our hopes weren't already real inside us, we couldn't even hope them. So it's a consciousness that's already there.
Yeah, and I think several people who wrote in were interested to know how we think about supporting that kind of hope or inspiring that kind of hope, especially in young people. So one of the people who wrote in asked, this is from Mary Beechler from Athens, Ohio, and they ask, how do we best support young women today?
Listen to them. I think we know we're worth listening to because somebody listens to us. Just like we know we're lovable because somebody loves us. So the more we can say, what do you care about, what interests you, let's do this together, how can I, and we can do it across groups or generations, or, you can't make somebody feel valuable and hopeful by telling them what to do. It's by supporting that unique person who's inside there. And I feel so, young women are so exciting and full of, and I hope I'm useful to young women because I remember when it was worse, so I can guarantee that the general trend line is up. And
Cheer us up a bit.
Yeah, and young women are so, once I realized it in an audience like this, when like a 12-year-old girl stood up in the discussion time and said to me, "I am becoming, in many ways, a young woman who takes no shit." And young women and young men have better shit detectors than those of us who have had to put up with more. So we learn from each other. We need each other. Listen, one of the last really bad divisions is putting old people by themselves. I mean, we need age integration in the same way that we need every other kind of communal integration.
So I know we have some young women in our audience. I think we have 3 Girl Scout troops from the area.
I was a Girl Scout.
So
in Toledo, I was a Girl Scout.
Yes, Toledo. And so they asked, wanting to know, how did your single gender experiences in all women's colleges and Girl Scouts, how did that shape your perspectives on leadership?
Well, I'm not sure I knew it at the time that I was living in East Toledo, which is not Toledo, because have you ever noticed how everything that's the wrong thing has an adjective? And it was kind of tough. And in the 6th and 7th grades, there was a Girl Scout troop led by the math teacher and the English teacher. And they were great. They took us on camping trips, and I mean, they just taught us so much, and we did things together, and we talked to each other. It made a huge, huge difference. And years later, when I was sitting at Ms. Magazine, I got a letter with a little photograph of these 2 old white-haired ladies with their arms around each other's shoulders. Of course, it was a lesbian couple, but who knew at that point?
Of course, yeah.
And they were wonderful. I was so grateful for them. And the problem was, and I say this to the Girl Scouts, that after that came adolescence and the extreme pressure of gender. Because as soon as you're capable of bearing a child, suddenly the gender role comes down on you, like the Iron Maiden, And we didn't talk about being Girl Scouts anymore. And I think that's passed, because now there are older Girl Scouts too, I think. Yeah. But no, it was tremendously valuable. I don't know that I could have grown up without it. They were tough times, and that made all the difference.
Well, and I think, because you have been a person who's inspired so many of us, I think also people wanted to know the people in your life who inspired you. So Stephanie Schmidt, also from Athens, Ohio, wanted to know, who's the woman you most admire and why?
Oh, that's so hard. Could you answer that? I can tell you some of them.
I think she would be okay if you told us more than one.
I think first of Wilma Mankiller, because I think she brought me the most knowledge that I didn't have. And by that I mean that there were, and still are, 500 or 600 cultures and language groups and so on in Indian country here before Europeans showed up, that were, by and large, they Cherokee, and I don't know all the languages by any means, but most of them seem not to have had gendered pronouns. They didn't even have he and she. People were people. And the paradigm of society was the circle, not a hierarchy, not a pyramid. There was no word for nature because we were part of nature. Our Constitution, of course, is based on the Iroquois Confederacy, which was layers of consensus groups. And I think now we learn that in law school at least, and I hope otherwise. I think the suffrage movement at least a lot of the suffrage movement was inspired by the Seneca women in upstate New York and the European American women who could see this equal society over there. And meanwhile, the Seneca women could see these white women, and they referred to them as those who die in childbirth because they were appalled. But Elizabeth Cady Stanton, all these people could see those women over there who decided for themselves when and whether to have children, owned their own, it was just entirely different. They controlled agriculture, men hunted, but they both were necessary. So because she taught me so much that I had no idea, and because if it happened once, it can happen again in a new way, I guess I would say Wilma. Right?
Yeah, and I think, today, as I've had the chance to, listen to you speak to our classes, I've been inspired listening to, from my colleagues or others who, either read Ms. Magazine or, listened to you speak and to, really pivotal moments in people's lives that were sort of able to transform their vision of what they could do. And so I had one more question before we turn it over to the audience, and I wondered if you could say how you think that feminism can or maybe even should transform someone's life.
Well, you don't even need the word feminism exactly. It's just the realization for each of us, whatever our outsides look like, that each of us is a unique combination of millennia upon millennia of heredity and environment combined in a way that could never have happened before and could never happen again. And at the same time, we are human and we are part of the natural universe. And feminism is one of many paths to get there. Whatever it is that allows us to know that, to get out of the hierarchical thing and understand that with humans we are linked, we are not ranked, and that there's this uniquely valuable person in there. Sometimes people say, or a mother will say, what would you tell my daughter? And I always say, I'd tell your daughter not to listen to me, to listen to herself, and we're there to support her and her voice and her interests.
So I think we are now going to turn it over to audience questions. So we want to know, the questions you have for Gloria, the things that you're passionate about or on your heart. So I think we have microphones in both the aisles. So feel free to come up and ask your question.
Right, and I think the lights are going to come up so we can all see each other and we can become more of a circle. Okay.
Yeah.
And you don't have to ask a question. You can also make an organizing announcement to. You can tell me what I need to know that I don't know. That would be great.
So I think we'll start over here to my left, because I think we have I'm guessing maybe the Girl Scout troop, but I might be wrong.
If you could if you could design or create a patch or journey for Girl Scouts, what would it be?
Oh, that's so nice. Gosh, I have to think about that, because you have a lot of patches that I don't know, since I was but I guess maybe a globe, because to say we're all on Spaceship Earth. Either that or maybe a bird, because I think the human race is a bird with two wings, and if one is broken, the bird can't fly. Right?
So I'll kind of go back and forth. So let's over here.
Hi. As a writer, do you have any specific advice for young female journalists, especially ones that are trying to break in the field, like fresh out of college? Please help.
It's both easier and harder now, isn't it? Because you can get on the web and you can get your work out there, but you can't make a living from most of, I wouldn't write for the for the Huffington Post and all those places because they don't pay their writers. It's really wrong, right? But, I would just say, write what you're passionate about and care about, or you find funny or amusing, and write it so people can understand it. Maybe read it out loud. I find it helpful to read what I write out loud because then you know what's extraneous that you should get rid of and so on. And just get a lot of samples of your writing so that you can say to publishers or online posts or whatever it is, here's what I do, and look at the happenings around you in the news and see what isn't being said. So it is an aha, and people will want to publish it, put it online, read it.
Okay, thank you.
So I think from this side, please.
Thank you. One of the women that I most admire in this region who works very closely with families and children, a lot in domestic situations, domestic abuse, etc. But she understands, obviously we are in Athens and it is a bubble with a campus that is incredible, and there are so many of us that have worked so hard to get where we are. And my question, though, is how do we look beyond our bubbles? I mean, how do we go into our rural areas? How do we look at Appalachia? And how do we make sure that, that we're building other women up, and that this movement that we've worked forever on, how do we make sure that that's relevant to everyone?
Mm-hmm. Well, in a way here in Athens, you're lucky because you are a campus in the midst of a very poor surrounding area. So you can see and make and create ways that you can connect with the surrounding area and be helpful. Traditionally, I don't know what's possible here, but the women's centers have often served both the campus and the community at the same time. Battered women's shelters have often been places where campus students and faculty worked. So traditionally, I think, or not so traditionally, they haven't been around that long, Black studies and women's studies and everything I think of as remedial studies, that have been more likely to have ties with the community than most other academic areas. So I think it's a very big opportunity, and it may well inform you, and you may learn more than from your courses, from having that kind of community connection, and you can also make a difference. I know that it's not always so easy. There is what used to be called town gown tensions and differences, but I think especially there are kinds of connections that come from a movement can surpass that.
Yeah, and I will just say, as someone who's only been at Ohio University for about a year, I'm inspired by the work that my colleagues do in WGSS, that the Women's Center does, our Office for Diversity and Inclusion. But I think it's also always important to think of, what more can we do? So, to on the one hand, kind of acknowledge that work, but then also I think it's so important to think of, where else can we be?
Yeah, and one thing you could do too is make the state legislature shape up.
Yeah. We should all be running for office, really.
Right.
Okay, on this side, please.
Hi. So many young females like myself are working towards degrees that lead to careers that are very much male-dominated. And I was wondering what advice you might give to someone like me and the other girls on campus to how they might navigate these careers.
Is there a particular field
I'm going into political science.
Well, I think you should just have the attitude that there's this poor, benighted world out there that doesn't know what democracy is. and you can help them because you come from an underrepresented group. And you can make connections that are not being made. Like, you know, when I was just saying that if you don't have a democratic family, well, you're never going to have a democracy outside. That is not something you hear in Washington. Mm. And you can bring that, right? And they're certainly in deep shit now with sexual harassment, so they should.
Absolutely. Please.
Hi. I was wondering what your advice would be on how to best handle casual sexism in the workplace and in the school environment from our peers, or male peers, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say, first of all, just to name it. You know, if I did something that offended you, I would want you to tell me, not just hate me, you know. So if you can say it, at least, I mean, and in the first instance, in a way that, you know, can be heard, you know, I understand you may not be, but that I want you to, or to tie it to a form of discrimination that that guy himself may have experienced and might be able to connect it to sexism, so he will understand that it's hurtful. But even if it doesn't work, whatever it is that you do, there's one thing worse than it's not working, and that's not doing it. Because then you will walk around thinking, what if I had said, maybe, you know. So to name it in a way that you would want it named to you. If that doesn't work, to escalate. If that doesn't work, get a few other people. If that doesn't work, picket. If that doesn't work, you know, write letters of complaint, expose. I don't know. You can just escalate, right? But do it.
Yeah. On this side, please.
Thanks for coming. I'm an older feminist. I'm interested in how, you've spoken a little to this already, but I'd like more help with how you see feminism in the world of 2018. Patriarchy is still with us, but is there still a space, a place for women-only space, for women's separatism, or not?
Mm. Yes, no, there is. I mean, and here's why. I think it may not be for the reason people think. It isn't because we're mad at men. It's because when we are in a group of women by ourselves and we think there's something missing, what we're missing is the rest of ourselves. It's the role that men have played in our lives in, you know, doing whatever has been culturally assigned to men. And it gets us to develop that in ourselves. So, you know, it shouldn't be something that is publicly funded and excludes men. We're not trying to do that, but privately. And I think men also have meet in, they're probably men's groups, right? Men's
all kinds, I think, of men's groups, but.
No, not the sort of the locker room kind, but the sort of. So it's just it's a path to self-discovery. No, it still absolutely has a place. Mm-hmm. And you know, I think the people I know who have survived and prospered and had a good time usually had a group of girlfriends who, a kind of chosen family of loosely organized women who helped them, not because we were mad at men or excluding men, but because walking around female for 40 or 50 years does give you some unique experiences that you can then help each other with.
Thanks.
Thank you. Please.
Hi, Gloria. This is a question I've been struggling with a lot lately, and I thought you might have some insight. So I know that with everything that's going on in Hollywood and in politics with these famous men that are being called out for abusive behaviors, in a way that's been a relief. It's great to see that suddenly that's being called out, but in a way I've been really discouraged because I feel like there's a bizarre sort of thing I see going on where these people are being like shamed and othered in such a way that, not that those behaviors shouldn't be seen as 100% unacceptable and with consequences, but there's also this weird sort of way that we as a society seem to be sort of pushing off this collective problem that we have onto a few like boogeymen at the top, that we can say these are bad men who have done a bad thing, the rest of us are good. So is there a way that we can, when we're talking about this, when we're having this conversation with other people, that we can sort of reckon with these things more holistically as a symptom of a greater problem in our society, as opposed to just like a few bad guys who got away with some stuff?
No, I totally agree with you, and I think a second wave of immediate stories needs to be done about the responses of men. Because a man who says, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do it, I hurt people, is very different from the guy who says, no, I'm the victim, you're the attacker, I'm going to sue you, I'm going to punish you, you know, which is DARVO, it's called, you know, there's a whole little acronym for it. If you go online and look for Jennifer Freyd, F-R-E-Y-D, you'll see massive research on the differences in response. So we need to take that into account very much. Here, you know, what's coming to my mind, this may or may not make a lot of sense, but one of the, I was trying to write Wilma and I were trying to write a book together, and I'm going to try to do it anyway even. And what we were doing was trying to take features of original, ancient, and continuing societies that we could learn from, pre-patriarchal societies that are still around and that we could learn from. Okay, so one of them was a Ghanaian cultural group that, you know, when a member of that group did something destructive, they punished that person by separating them out and leaving them alone for a period of time, because we're communal animals, so probably being isolated is a universal punishment. However, not like our solitary confinement, you know, they didn't do that. But anyway, they isolated the person for a while. But when that person came back into the society, having been punished and having apologized, there was a long ritual amount of time when everybody who knew that person told them every good thing they ever did. We could do that. It knits people back into the culture, and it rewards what we do that's positive. So there's a huge difference to me. I mean, I'm not sure that Donald Trump has ever done anything good. But in a kind of way, that's almost not his fault, because he doesn't know fact from fiction, you know, because he has a narcissistic personality disorder, as all the members of the APA have told us, which means that he slavishly follows any praise and fights the smallest criticism. Yeah. So he may not actually know fact from fiction. But most people do know fact from fiction, have done very positive things. And, you know, look at the array of people we see in the press. And the important thing is not only to say, you know, this is wrong and it's hurt people and you have to stop it and also, you know, recognize it, but also to say, here are the good things. Human beings work on yes better than no. And so, you know, we have to recognize the difference in response and you know, reward the good things as well as naming the bad, right?
Please.
Hi. So I am originally from Puerto Rico, and I was just wondering what your opinions were on Mayor Carmen Dueling, who has inspired many women today for being so outspoken against our current orange leader.
She's the only, well, I'm sure there are lots of voices in Puerto Rico, but she's the one that we hear standing up and not say, you know, not going along with the idea that the, you know, anything that is adequate. No, I think she's, yeah, she's very, very, very heroic and important, and an important truth teller. She is going to be always remembered, right?
Thank you so much.
And reminding us that there's still a huge need there, right? We have not fixed that.
Yeah, no, it is incredible, and it's so clearly racist.
Yes.
You know, I mean, you know, if it was Alabama, you know, I mean, even New Orleans, as terrible as that was.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Please.
Since starting college, I've gotten more involved, and I've kind of been realizing, like, to be passionate is beautiful and it's necessary, but it's also extremely tiring. And some mornings I wake up and I'm like, I can do this, I know I can make an impact. And then other mornings I'm like, I'm just gonna have kids and they can do it. And I was wondering on those mornings when you're just tired, and not just like you're tired, what advice do you have to keep moving,
well,
I guess,
I think
like,
to myself,
as an individual?
Having kids would be harder.
Yeah.
I don't really mean that, you know, because we get to choose what we love. I don't. But well, I think one of the ways in which I think young activists now are smarter than we were is that they talk about self-care, and we did not. So we just were flat-out activists until we were exhausted, and then it, you know, it took us a long time to come back from that. Yeah. It seems to me, in a general way, maybe this isn't your experience, but in a general way, younger activists are smarter about, I mean, I get on all those group phone calls, and at the end of them, people talk about self-care. I think, we never did that. That's fan-fucking-tastic, you know. That's one thing. And the other thing is just to remember that if you want to have dancing and poetry and sex and joy at the end of the revolution, you have to have dancing and poetry and sex and joy along the way. Because as smart as Marx and Engels and everybody were, the error of their philosophy, the major error seems to have been that they said the ends justifies the means, when in fact the means you choose create the ends you get. Yeah. Right?
Please.
My name is Isabelle and I'm 10 years old. I want to know what made you want to be a journalist.
You know, that's interesting. I think it was partly because I just grew up reading books. I mean, I wasn't going to school much, and so I was reading. I mean, I thought Louisa May Alcott was the be-all and end-all of the world, and I would imagine that she was going to come back to life. What would I show her? That she... So the idea of being, and of course, and I read everything, including her novels and nonfiction, you know, that were recording the world around her. Also, I think the ability to record without being an actor in it probably appeals to women disproportionately, because we don't know if we can be an actor in it, but we can observe it. You know? And my mother had been a journalist, which I didn't even know because it happened long before I was born. But nonetheless, I absorbed it a little bit from her. And just for a lot of reasons, it just seemed like what I really wanted to do. I think the test of what you want to do is partly, I think, that when you're doing it, you don't think you should be doing something else.
Yeah.
So, and I would say writing is the only thing that's true of for me.
Thank you.
And I can't wait to read what she writes, right?
Please.
I'm wondering how, in today's political climate, where we so clearly have a leader who's kind of blatantly misogynistic and oppressive just out in public, how to stay positive, especially with our younger generation and us as women, you know, trying to stay positive and keep barreling through and knowing that, you know, we're going to keep this feminist movement going and really have a say in all this.
You know, I don't know that ever in my life I've had such a convenient, complete package of everything that's wrong. You know, so it's sort of useful, you know, because, I mean, first of all, he's an unsuccessful businessman even. You know, if he had just, somebody figured out, right, that if he had just invested the money he inherited, he would be richer than he is.
Oh, yes.
He's gone bankrupt innumerable times. You know, I mean, it's hard to find everything wrong in the same package. So I would say that if we really work hard, he will have been the thing in history that turned it around because we are woke.
Please.
So I have a 6-year-old niece who looks up to me and her mom for guidance, and she's just starting school and starting to realize that there's these pre-placed stereotypes on her. How do I help shift her outlook on things and help her grow into a strong woman?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not, you know, I trust your instincts. You'll figure out how to do it. But I was just at a celebration of a friend, an African-American man, who is a great man and who started out with a lot of difficulties. And his mother used to just say to him about the racism around him and the people, the neighbors who didn't want him to come into their house and stuff. They're sick. They're sick. Racism is a disease and they're sick. And you just have to feel sorry for them.
No.
You know? So, you know, just to say, look, you know, some people, it's not their fault, but they grow up thinking that, you know, boys are better than girls or only boys can do one thing. But, you know, you just have to be patient with them because they're sick, you know. I don't know if that will work, but it's kind of true.
Yeah.
No? Right.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. First of all, I wanted to tell you that my mother was a big fan of yours. She really admired you. And because she admired you, she exposed me to some of your writings and your speaking and being active in Girl Scouts and all sorts of things from the very beginning. And she also allowed me to choose whatever I wanted to do. Did I want to play with Star Wars toys or Barbies or both? You know, no choice whatsoever. It was all up to me that way. But my question for you is, and I know it may seem a little odd, but on the very first issue of Ms. Magazine, of course, you had Wonder Woman. I used to dress up as Wonder Woman, like cut out paper and make my own tiaras and bracelets and everything. And I wondered if you knew the impact that Wonder Woman would have on us 75 years later, and if what your creative process was in choosing her to be on the cover.
Mm-hmm. Well, my creative process was just like yours. I grew up with Wonder Woman. Remember, think about my age. You know, she was the only, pretty much the only female comic book hero. I think there was Sheena of the Jungle or something, but she was not there. So I had grown up with her. And by the time the magazine was about to start, I realized that, you know, from looking at the comic books, that Wonder Woman had lost all of her, I mean, she had suffered the bad 50s and 60s like so many of us did. She had lost all of her magical powers, no bracelets, no lasso, she'd become a kind of like a car hop, you know. So, and there was Joanne Edgar, another editor of the magazine. She also had grown up with Wonder Woman. So both of us thought that if we put the original Wonder Woman on the cover and put some of the Golden Age original strips in the magazine, that we could create support for giving her back herself. And so that was really our purpose. And we did, and we worked, and we, lobbied and drove DC Comics utterly crazy until finally the guy who was head of comics then, an Italian guy, I've forgotten his name, called me up and he said, okay, she's got her magic lasso back, she's got her bracelets back, she's got her invisible plane back, and she has a black Amazon sister named Nubia. Now will you leave me alone? So it was great to see the movie. I must say, maybe I'm a sucker, I don't know, but I really loved the movie. Did you see the movie? Right.
Do you feel any sense of like self-satisfaction in seeing the movie?
Yes, we rescued Wonder Woman. What can I say? Or we helped to rescue Wonder Woman. Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. Please.
Hi, I'm a high school student, and I often find myself struggling with knowing how to share my beliefs on gender equality, and enlighten's kind of a strong word, but I guess enlighten people around me who are not so knowledgeable about this kind of subject. And I was wondering if you had any advice on how to do that in a setting where a lot of people are not very susceptible to those ideas.
Well, in general, I would just try to do it the way that you would want somebody to do it for you if you weren't understanding something that really mattered, basic, right? But do you have an example? I mean, this is what we do in organizing meetings, so what do you say when they say, right?
I guess one of the other people who was asking the question brought up casual sexism, and that does happen a lot in high school, and when those kind of comments are made, I find myself...
Can you give me a couple of examples?
I guess talking about this recent sexual harassment allegations and those events, there are some boys and people, even girls, who joke about it and kind of laugh it off and say that the people who are standing up and saying that they were sexually harassed are making a big deal about it and are not worthy of saying that. And sometimes I find myself coming across a little too strong to these people, and maybe telling them that, no, you're wrong, like this is not how it is, and I feel like that's not very productive.
Right. Well, maybe instead of saying, no, you're wrong, you could say, reverse it. I'll tell you, reversal is a great tactic, I find, because even the power to define is very political. So if a man comments on your appearance and you comment back on his appearance, he's shocked, even though it's complimentary in both cases. Nonetheless, you've taken the power to define. So if you can find a way of saying how you, whatever it is, or renaming it. I mean, rape is not just rape, it's not just rape, but it's body invasion. And men get body invasion when you talk about prisons, especially, where, as I was saying, men who are not otherwise gay use younger, weaker men as if they were women, and they, people get that. Just anything that can produce empathy, that can get the person who's talking to think what would happen if they were at the wrong end of that experience, rather than saying you're wrong, just striving for some path to identification.
Thank you.
also go to Athens High School, and I find that a lot of people there, and also in general, seem to think that misinjury is the face of feminism and that it's equal. So how do we prevent and combat
Think
this?
that what is the face of feminism?
Misinjury?
Misogyny. Okay,
I think
got
she's
it.
saying misandry, so hating.
Misandry.
sorry,
Oh,
sorry.
okay, got it. Okay, sorry. Yeah.
So a lot of people seem to think that that's
That
equal
we
to
hate
feminism.
men is basically what you're saying.
Yeah, so that women think that they're better and we want more. So how do we prevent and combat this? Because it seems simple, but it's really hard to rationalize.
We would not sink to that level. Are you kidding me? No. That comes from interrupting male supremacy. So they think that to interrupt male supremacy is to downgrade men. They think that equality, right, is right. So maybe a racial parallel would help, because just to call out racism is not to say that anybody wants to be white, wants to be white or hates white people or whatever. On the contrary, it's kind of calling for human contact. I don't know, can anybody think of a better way of doing this? Can you think?
No, it's a good question. I think, do you have a sense of, with your, I'm guessing, is this your classmates or your teachers?
Generally the classmates.
Is this something you think that they are taught, sort of bringing from home? Is it something that you feel like they're getting from the media?
I think it's the media, and I think maybe it's home as well. I find the word feminazi often associated with me as someone who just wants equality.
But that was Rush Limbaugh, who's an asshole from... He's the one, he's been calling us all feminazis for, 25 years at least? I don't know, really a long time. But, okay, here's the answer. I once wrote a long essay, and you can find the research anywhere, that the Nazi policy towards women was anti-feminist in the extreme. The first thing Hitler came to power on an anti-feminist platform. He got a woman from England. He couldn't find a woman sufficiently anti-feminist in Germany, because Germany, between the wars, had become a very democratic place. There were more women in the Bundestag than in any other parliament. There was a big gay and lesbian movement. There were, that's what he was running against. So he imported a kind of Phyllis Schlafly person from England to tour around, and his whole platform was Kinder, Kirche, was kitchen, church, children. That was the whole ball game. It was 100%. And the first thing he did when he came to power was to padlock the family planning clinics and declare abortion a crime against the state. And he created Lebensborn, where women were, meant to have, white women, of course, Aryan women, meant to have babies endlessly. And so it's the opposite. I wrote an essay, which you can find, I'm sure, called "If Hitler Were Alive Today, Whose Side Would He Be On?"
Thank you.
I think the only thing I would add is I think you can see it as an opportunity. In the beginning of many of my classes, I'll tell my students, I'm a feminist and this is what it means to me. And I once had a student say, well, why call yourself a feminist if it has all the problematic baggage to it? And I said, well, that's why I became a professor, so I get to explain every day, what it means to me. And so, I think for you to kind of to keep you going, you can see this as an opportunity. I get to keep explaining to you what it means. Yeah.
And if things get rough, you can just say to a woman, the only alternative to being a feminist is being a masochist. And see what happens. Maybe not, I don't know.
Please.
Hi. So
this current wave with exposure of sexual harassment cases has been, very empowering for me as a woman, and I'm sure a lot of other femmes out there. But I can't help but notice that a trend in these cases is that, like women had come forward before, but their cases were swept under the rug in settlements that a company or a person did so as to like protect the image of their company. And so I know that this is kind of a dividing question, but I'm wondering, can we truly reach gender equality under late capitalism, or is that issue of money always going to take precedent over feminist issues?
Well, one of the greatest ways to battle against capitalism is to take away cheap labor. And if we just got equal pay, it would be $200 billion more every year in the economy, which is the greatest stimulus we could possibly have. But I think we should also tot up and show how much has been paid out in settlements, private settlements, millions and millions and millions of dollars. And I think we need a lawsuit from stockholders against the corporations that have been secretly wasting their money by a massive lawsuit. So we, secretly paying huge amounts of money to hide the bad behavior of, all these guys. So I think it's given us a lot of tools, anti-capitalist tools, if you know what I mean, that is in the way they understand, which is huge amounts of money that they are totally wasting. And stockholders who've been up to now passive are not going to be so passive anymore.
Thank you.
Please.
Thank you. It's working, good. So I'm a homegrown activist, especially in the last few years, and I've noticed that there's a bunch of people in my generation and everybody is getting involved the last few years, and it's truly inspiring. But with that, there's also people who are very, very much opposed to activists like me and everyone in this room, probably, who want to silence us and keep us from talking. This happens in our schools, this happens even at home sometimes, and on the internet, obviously there's lots of people who do it. Is there any way that activists that are a little timid and a little afraid of being called out or being persecuted for the hope we have to make things better, is there any advice that you'd like to give them?
Well, I've only lately learned what to say when people call me a bitch. Thank you. But what I was saying before, striving for empathy, trying to find something within their experience that might be a parallel to our experience, all of that is hopeful. But I also want to say, too, that I don't know about you, but here's part of the problem of our female socialization. If you put me in a room with 100 people over there who, really want to do something together, and there are 30 people over there who are saying, no, this is stupid and dumb, I will go and try to convince the 30 people instead of moving with the 100 people. Just ignore them and move with the 100 people, because they're probably more with you than against you. And we're so accultured to make nice and unify that we sometimes understand, we sometimes don't realize that in a way it's a form of authoritarianism. Sometimes I think, wait a minute, I'm saying you don't agree with me? Let me explain it to you again. And this is not so good either, Let them think what they think, but move with the people who want to move.
Thank you so much.
Please.
Okay, so first off, I'm from Toledo too, and I saw you a few years ago at the Stranahan, so woo, round two, love ya, you're badass then, badass now. But
that was an incredible, it's this huge theater in Toledo where, you know, if you like me, you know, went to Wade High School and you find yourself back into, I mean, I was having an out-of-body experience.
Yeah. So anyways, there is this great quote by Desmond Tutu that I wrote on my Women's March sign and everything, and it's, if you are silent in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. And I feel like a lot of times, you know, we talk about the opposing force and all that, but there are also just people that just don't care. And I'm like, come on, like, do something, we gotta care. And so it's kind of, how do I deal with this apathetic sort of culture and this sort of just people that don't care, because it's great to be with all these people who do, but it's also kind of tiring to just be with people who just don't care.
Well, I'm not sure there's one giant cure, but I think part of it is you're having fun, they see that you're happy, you're having a good time, you have a community, you have people who like you and you like them, and you're doing fun things together, you know, they'll begin to envy you. So, you know, I think that happens a lot. We envy the community, you know, that comes with activism. That's one way. Another way is figuring out what they do care about. Right? Another way is figuring out what it was that killed their caring. You know, because who knows what happened to them as children, or, you know. I think, you know, it's just, not that you should spend your whole time doing this, but, you know, kind of trying to figure out why it is that they're not accessible emotionally.
All right, cool, thanks, love ya.
Please.
I have a question on behalf of a slightly different demographic than most of the people asking questions tonight. At the beginning of last month, there was an article that went viral that talked about the women of Generation X and how we're in our late 40s, late 30s, in that range, and how unbelievably stressed out we are. And we were the generation who benefited from the work your generation did, and we tried to pick it up. I feel like we're turning it into advice columnists tonight, so I won't ask for advice on behalf of my generation, but why do you think we are so, those of us who are no longer quite so young, but still young enough to, you know, why are we so strung out? Why have we lost so much of our hope?
Well, you know, I suspect you know the answer way better than I. Do you?
I mean, I think we're tired. I speak for my friends and I, at least, but I don't know what else.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe we're. What?
Oh, I didn't hear. Yeah.
Oh.
It'll get better.
Oh, it'll get better. Oh, she's saying it'll get better. You know, I think some of it is that we maybe had an idea of success that wasn't ours. That is, instead of saying we get to do what we love, we were saying we have to do it all. You know, right. And that is allowing the culture as it is, a male-dominated culture, which is not good for men either, you know, to say, here's what professional success looks like, but then if you're a woman, you also have to have children and have 2 jobs instead of 1, which men couldn't do either. And, you know, so it just added on instead of being able to select and do what we love. And I worry about it in the work area, and I worry about it when it comes to sex, because the idea of liberation is still mostly a male idea, which is more is better. And, you know, having sex with somebody you wouldn't have lunch with, you know, which...
I
mean... So... which led bell hooks, I think, to say that for some women, liberation was celibacy. You know, liberation is whatever you want, it's whatever is right for you. It is not following the standard. And that includes making a lot of money. Here's what I would like to do, actually, to kind of reverse what you and I are talking about now. I have always wanted to give a course at Harvard Business School called Money is Boring. And people who only care about money are boring. I mean, unless you do something really creative and interesting with it, who cares? You know, who cares how much you die with? You're probably blighting your children to leave them an inheritance that means that they're never going to do anything, you know? Yeah. So I just think we need to question the standards of success, or what we should, to question the shoulds, and strive to look, you know, at what we really care about and love and want to do.
Thank you.
So we still have so many questions, but we're getting near the end of our time. So I think we have time for just one more from
I'm answering too long. That's part of the
problem. No. We want to hear your answers. That's why we're here. So on this side.
Okay.
I want to preface my I want to preface my question by saying that you're just a beautiful woman, and it's an amazing experience just listening to you talk.
You know, that's such a lovely thing to say. And I was walking in the street in New York the other day, and I was thinking, you know, I was really happy as a young woman being smiled at by men I didn't know. But I'm really happier being smiled at by women.
I have a two-tiered question. I believe, from my perspective, that we are in the midst of an amazing time where all these movements are coming up because my generation is not afraid to speak their mind. And we're really lucky to be historically a part of this. Unfortunately, I find myself reading on a daily basis this rhetoric of my problem is more problematic than your problem within these movements, these multiple movements that we're a part of: LGBTQA, trans movement, feminism, Black Lives Matter. As someone who's a minority, a feminist, and a woman, I find myself conflicted with these, because I don't believe that my problem is more problematic than your problem should be a discourse that's occurring in these times. So just to shorten this, did you see this type of issue occurring when you were largely politically active in the second wave of feminism? And if you did or did not, what is your response to this?
You know, trying to prove you've suffered the most is just another hierarchical thing, you know. So there's no competition of tears. Tears are tears, for whatever reason they come about. And I think, to the best of our ability, we should just kind of not spend too much time on that, but just look at a problem and say, who does it affect? And we shouldn't work on it unless we have the people who it affects represented there, you know, because the people who experience the problem are going to know how to fix it the best. And, you know, just look at the reality and say to people with entirely different experiences, is there a way I can help? And here's how you can help me. Just to kind of, you know, reach across that divide. But it is another form of hierarchy.
Yeah. And you'll have the honor of our last question of the evening.
Oh boy.
Are there any announcements that we've missed? Any organizing announcements here? The organizing announcements can get precedence. No? Okay.
Hi, Hi, I'm Hannah Bernstein. I'm in charge of the Period Project at Athens High School. We're accepting donations for pads, and if you want to donate, that'd be really appreciated. They're also going to go to the middle school, who also has a Period Project.
Great. You can tell me what that's about.
I want to say that that project has saved me many a time. It's real nice. It's good stuff. But so my question is, it's going to be advice. What would your advice be when you find yourself in the situation, if you're like alone or even with a friend, like walking down the street or something, and you like a dude catcalls you or yells at you, and you want to yell back, like you want to be like F off, but you also don't want to die. You don't want to be followed and killed. So like, what do you do?
Well, I don't want you to get killed either,
Yeah,
but
me neither.
It does remind me of, there's infinite numbers of Jewish jokes, and one is that two Jews are walking down the street and, or they're telling the story of walking down the street and being scared of the two people walking behind them, and they're saying, but there were two people behind us and we were all alone. So sometimes I think we have more power than we think. And we can respond. If they comment on our appearance, we can comment on theirs. We can laugh, say you must be kidding, wait until you get in a safe spot, under, next to a building or something, and then say it. I don't know, but make a joke, but I find it helpful to do something, because otherwise you walk around afterwards wishing that you had, and it makes you feel powerless. So whether it is reaching out in a friendly way, or making a joke, or just reversing the insult, whatever it is, nothing is true 100% of the time, I realize, but mostly it helps to do something.
Right.
Thank you.
So you've been so generous in answering so many of our questions, and I hope that we all walk away from this evening, or I know we will walk away inspired to make the changes that we can in the spaces that we're in. So with that, let's give an enormous thank you. Wait, she has something.
I have to make my traditional organizers deal with you, if you don't mind, because I'm worried about, there's so many, it's so precious that we're here, right? So just promise me that before you leave, you will look around and see 2 or 3 people you don't know, and introduce yourselves, say what you're doing, what you care about. If you came here, you probably share a lot of hopes and dreams and values and jokes, and who knows. You might find a new job, a new love affair, But it's very precious that we've been together in this room. And my hope is, for all of us, me included, that our lives will be a little better and more interesting the next day and the next and the next, because we were here. What do we have to say?